Hey everyone, welcome back. We're always hearing how teenagers make crazy decisions and their brains are just wired differently.
Yeah, kind of a mystery, right?
Totally. And it seems like there's an epidemic of mental health issues among teens these days. Makes you wonder what's really going on in those developing brains.
Right. It's a critical topic for sure.
So today we're going to do a deep dive into some cutting-edge research that sheds light on this whole adolescent brain thing.
Awesome.
We'll be looking at findings from the Society for Neuroscience Conference, the Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, that's the ABCD study.
Right, the ABCD study.
And the National Consortium on Alcohol and Neurodevelopment in Adolescence, or NCANDA.
Yeah, those are some fantastic resources for understanding this complex period of development.
So much to unpack. Let's jump right in. I was blown away by this statistic. Drug use among 8th graders actually increased by 61% between 2016 and 2020.
Yeah, 61%. It's alarming, really underscores the urgency of getting a handle on this issue.
Absolutely. It's like a wake-up call, right? We need to understand what's going on and how to help these kids.
Definitely. And that's where understanding brain development comes in. The adolescent brain is going through this massive reorganization.
Yeah, it's not just a smaller version of an adult brain, is it?
Definitely not. It's like a major construction project going on in there, especially in the prefrontal cortex, which is crucial for decision-making, planning, impulse control, all that good stuff.
So it's still under construction, making it more vulnerable to, risky behaviors and stuff.
Exactly. It's kind of like a superhighway being built. The routes are being laid down, but they're not paved yet.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Makes it really susceptible to influences, both good and bad, which is why this period is so important for interventions, too. We can really make a difference.
I see. Now, this was fascinating to me. I read about this research that shows brain circuitry isn't even the same across all adolescents.
Right.
There are actually differences between boys and girls.
Yeah, this is some groundbreaking stuff coming out of the ABCD study.
I know. Qinyu Zhao, I think, was the researcher.
Yes, Qinyu Zhao. Her work showed some surprising sex differences in brain circuitry.
So are you saying boys and girls are literally wired differently?
Well, when it comes to certain brain circuits, yeah, it seems so. Specifically, circuits involved in cognitive control and attention, the strength of the connections, like how well different parts of the brain communicate with each other, it actually varied between boys and girls.
Wow.
And this could help explain why we see differences in how certain behavioral issues manifest in boys versus girls. Things like attention problems or impulsivity.
I get it. So a cookie-cutter approach to treatment wouldn't work?
Yeah.
We need to understand these differences to really help them.
Exactly. Recognizing these sex differences is key for tailoring interventions and making them more effective.
Makes sense. Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about dopamine. That whole reward system in the brain.
Right, the feel-good chemical.
Yeah. And isn't that system, super active during adolescence? Because teens are always seeking out new experiences and thrills.
Absolutely. That's a big part of what makes adolescence so unique. And there's some really interesting research on how dopamine relates to substance use in teens. Ashley Parr's work with the NCANDA study has been groundbreaking.
NCANDA, right.
Yeah, what's cool about her study is that it's longitudinal. They followed people over time, from adolescence into adulthood.
Ah, so they could see how dopamine levels and substance use changed over the years.
Exactly, not just a snapshot, but the whole movie. So they had 3 groups in the study. One group increased their substance use throughout their lives. Another group increased use in adolescence, but then decreased it in adulthood. And the third group never really used substances at all.
Okay, so 3 very different trajectories.
Right. And what they found was, get this, the group that decreased their substance use as adults, they actually had lower dopamine levels in a part of the brain called the striatum.
Wait, lower. Wouldn't that make someone less likely to seek out rewards and pleasurable experiences? It seems counterintuitive.
It does, right. But one theory is that people with lower dopamine might actually crave more intense experiences, like to compensate for that lower baseline level of reward.
Interesting. So it's like they're trying to jumpstart their dopamine system by seeking bigger thrills.
Exactly. It really highlights the complex interplay between biology, behavior, and the environment.
So much we still don't know about the brain.
Oh, for sure. But research like this is bringing us closer to understanding.
I hope so. It'd be amazing if we could identify these kids with lower dopamine early on, like before they even start experimenting with substances.
That's the dream. And Parr's research offers a glimmer of hope. She found that the group with lower dopamine also performed worse on tasks that measured inhibitory control.
Inhibitory control?
Basically, it's the ability to resist impulses. Think of it like your brain's braking system.
Ah, I see.
So these kids might be more likely to act on a whim, even if they know it's not the best choice.
So they're wired to seek more rewards, and they have less control over their impulses. That's a tough combination.
It is, and it really points to the potential for early intervention.
Okay, I'm really curious to hear more about that. But maybe we should take a break here.
Sounds good.
We'll pick up this dopamine thread in part 2 of our deep dive. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, we were talking about dopamine, the brain's reward system, and how it's tied to substance use in teenagers.
Yeah, some really interesting findings there, especially about those lower dopamine levels and impulsivity.
Exactly. So let's dig into another study that looks at the long-term effects of early alcohol exposure on the brain.
Okay, so Laurel Seemiller's research on this is pretty fascinating.
Seemiller, okay.
Yeah, she used mice to model binge drinking in adolescence.
Mice. Interesting.
Yeah, they gave the mice alcohol during their adolescent period, basically simulating what binge drinking might look like in humans.
Okay, and then what?
Well, later in life, they tested the mice for anxiety using this thing called an elevated plus maze. It's basically a maze that's raised off the ground.
Ah, I see. So some mice are more comfortable up high than others.
Exactly. The more anxious a mouse is, the less likely it is to venture out onto the open arms of the maze. They prefer to stick to the enclosed areas where they feel safer.
Makes sense. So they get the mice drunk. They give them alcohol and then see how they handle heights later on.
Something like that. And here's the interesting part. The male mice that were exposed to alcohol during adolescence actually showed less anxiety later on compared to the females.
Wait, less anxiety? I thought alcohol usually makes anxiety worse, not better.
It does seem counterintuitive, right? But it really underscores how complex the brain is and how the same experience can have different effects depending on your sex.
So it's not just about the alcohol itself, but about how male and female brains react differently to it.
Precisely. It suggests there are some fundamental differences in how male and female brains are wired and how they respond to environmental influences like alcohol exposure.
Okay, so how do they explain this difference in anxiety levels? What's happening in their brains?
Well, Seemiller zeroed in on a specific type of neuron in the prefrontal cortex called somatostatin neurons, or SST neurons.
SST neurons, got it.
These neurons play a role in regulating the activity of other neurons that are involved in decision-making and executive function.
Okay, and why focus on those specific neurons?
Because they're especially vulnerable to the effects of experiences during adolescence. Remember, that's when the prefrontal cortex is still developing.
All right, the whole under construction thing.
Exactly. So what they found was that alcohol exposure increased the activity, the excitability of these SST neurons in both male and female mice. But, and this is the key, it led to different behavioral outcomes depending on sex.
I'm trying to put this all together. So increased activity in these SST neurons. Wouldn't that mean more inhibition in the prefrontal cortex?
You're on the right track. And
Yeah.
typically, more inhibition would be associated with increased anxiety. But it seems that the downstream effects of this increased SST activity on other brain circuits and ultimately on behavior differ between males and females.
Okay, so even though the same thing is happening at the cellular level, the end result is totally different.
Exactly. And that's why it's so crucial to study sex differences in the brain. It's not enough to just look at what's happening in one sex and assume it applies to the other.
Makes sense. This reminds me of those long-term studies we talked about earlier, like the NC-Ganda study. I guess studies like those are really valuable for getting this bigger picture.
Absolutely. Longitudinal studies are like gold. Instead of just a snapshot, they give us this whole movie of how things unfold over time.
So we can see how early experiences, brain development, behavior, how it all interacts over the years.
Exactly. And that's key for identifying risk factors, understanding how these different pieces fit together, and ultimately for developing more effective interventions.
So it's about looking ahead, not just at what's happening right now.
Exactly. What happens in adolescence can have a ripple effect that lasts a lifetime.
Wow, it makes you realize how crucial those teenage years really are. So much is happening in the brain. So where do we go from here? What's next in all this adolescent brain research?
Well, I think one of the most exciting frontiers is personalized medicine, tailoring interventions to each individual's unique needs and brain makeup.
Oh, that's interesting. Personalized medicine for the brain. Tell me more. Personalized medicine for the brain. That sounds pretty futuristic.
It kind of is, but it's also becoming more and more of a reality. We're talking about moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach and really tailoring treatment to each person's specific needs.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that even work?
One really promising area is neuroimaging. Scientists are using brain scans to identify biomarkers that could predict a person's risk of developing problems, like substance use disorders.
Biomarkers, like warning signs in the brain.
Exactly. And the idea is if we can catch these early on, we might be able to intervene before things escalate. It's about prevention rather than just reaction.
Wow, that's incredible. So it's like peeking inside the brain to see if there are any red flags.
Yeah, in a way. And it's not just neuroimaging. Researchers are also exploring the use of genetic testing to identify individuals who might be more susceptible to the effects of substances.
Oh, right, because our genes play a role too, don't they?
A huge role. So it's really about understanding the interplay of our genes and our environment. Like, how do these two things come together to shape our vulnerabilities?
I get it. It's about the whole picture, not just one piece of the puzzle.
Precisely. And by putting all these pieces together, we can create a more personalized and effective approach to treatment and prevention.
This is also fascinating, but I have to ask, will everyone have access to this kind of personalized care? Or will it only be available to those who can afford it?
That's a really important question. And to be honest, it's something that researchers and policymakers are grappling with right now. The goal is to make sure these interventions are accessible to everyone who needs them, regardless of their background or resources.
Because what good is a groundbreaking treatment if no one can actually get it?
Exactly. Equity and accessibility have to be part of the conversation from the start.
Absolutely. So zooming out a bit, what can parents and educators, communities do to support teens' brain health outside of a clinical setting?
Oh, there's so much we can all do. I mean, parents and caregivers can create that loving and supportive home environment where kids feel comfortable talking about their struggles. Open communication is so important.
Yeah, feeling safe to talk about things is huge, isn't it?
It is, and schools can implement programs that focus on social-emotional learning, teaching kids skills like self-awareness, empathy, and how to manage their emotions, and also just creating a sense of belonging.
So basically surrounding these kids with a supportive network.
Exactly. And communities can step up too, offering resources, mentorship programs, after-school activities, things that engage teens in positive ways and give them a sense of purpose.
So it really does take a village.
It absolutely does. And I think all this research is giving us the knowledge and tools to build a stronger village than ever before.
That's a really hopeful thought.
It is hopeful. The more we learn, the more empowered we are to help these young people thrive.
Wow, this has been an amazing journey. Thanks for taking us through the fascinating world of the adolescent brain.
It's been my pleasure. It's a topic I'm incredibly passionate about, so I'm always happy to share what I know.
Keep those brains curious, everyone. That's a wrap on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.